So I'm going to leave and then go back in with the email.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right, everybody, welcome. This is a class on meditation, Judaism, and self-mastery. Let's start with a little housekeeping. I'm going to convey the teachings of Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, Zichrono Lebracha. May his memory be a blessing. And we have three focuses here. We're going to make the point that meditation was once part of mainstream Jewish life, most especially prayer. We're going to find out that self-mastery is a universal spiritual practice and is one of the most important goals of meditation. When I say universal, meaning that, as Rabbi Kaplan points out, all ancient peoples have meditated, and in all these meditations, self-mastery was one of the most important goals. And as you'll find out from him, there was a time when we actually had advanced forms of meditation, possibly more advanced than other peoples across the globe. His mission, when he did the research into meditation, was to help Jews reclaim our spiritual heritage. Spiritual, meaning closeness to God. And there you go, that's the book, closeness to God. And a main route of achieving that was through meditation. So by studying his teachings, we are going to help him fill that mission of reclaiming our heritage. So let me just check in on people here. Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. Good. Let's just see if anybody else is here. Okay. Okay. The sources for this class, as Lori just showed, will be Meditation on the Bible, book number 1, Jewish Meditation, which is his second book about meditation, Jewish meditation. And we have other Kaplan texts, which we will refer to. In addition, there are other scholars we'll be referring to on meditation, raising consciousness, and self-mastery. There's a plethora of resources on this, and I'll be incorporating them as need be. The class is going to be conducted as an ongoing story. I'm going to tell the story based on Rabbi Kaplan's books. I'm going to read portions of his books, and the class will be able to follow with the outline I've established here. I have a general curriculum in terms of topics that I want to discuss, but I'm going to retain some flexibility, meaning that depending on questions people ask and how the discussion goes, I'm going to innovate the curriculum a bit so that, for instance, if we approach a topic tonight that needs more attention, then I'll kind of make room for that in the curriculum for the next session. However, each session will have unique information as well, so that if you can't make next week, but you can make the following week, you will still benefit with the information that's unique in that session. So you'll benefit by attending every session, but if you miss some, then you'll still get something out of the sessions you do attend. The format I'm going to follow is this. I'm going to present information for 40 minutes or so. Then we're going to have a short meditation. This is a basic meditation that I've done. It's very popular. It's very basic, and we'll spend a few minutes on that. And the reason is that since meditation is the focus of this class, people have to have a taste for it. Some of us may have had prior experience with this, and you may have advanced past this beginning meditation. That's fine. But I want everybody to have a taste. And afterwards, we'll have a schmooze time, which will give you an opportunity to make comments, ask questions, get a little bit deeper into the stuff I presented. It will flow much easier if we save those questions and comments for a dedicated time, which will take place after the meditation. So please work with that. And if you need be, get yourself a pad and jot down your questions and comments so that you're prepared at the schmooze part of the class. In terms of etiquette, by the way, can raise your thumb if you can see this outline that I have on the screen. Can you see this? All right, good. All right. In terms of etiquette, I'm not teaching people how to meditate. You need to get a teacher for that. I'm not teaching you mysticism or Kabbalah. I'm providing sources so that you can understand that this is a very Jewish thing to do. It's a very religious thing to do. And it's the foundation of the Judeo-Christian religion. So you're going to become very well acquainted with these concepts, and you're going to discover that how important it is for you to pursue this on your own and get yourself a teacher. I'm going to convey these expert opinions as best as I understand them, both of Rabbi Kaplan and the other sources. You are welcome to challenge, criticize, correct as you see fit. Just give me your sources. Okay. I'm going to record each session and post it on a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel for my business. I'm going to set up another playlist specifically for these classes, and they'll be available for you to review the classes. I've also just set up a Facebook group called Jewish Meditation Class Resource Room. I've invited, I think, everybody on this class list. If you haven't received an invitation to join the group, you probably received an invitation to connect with me on Facebook, at which point you can get into the group. I'll have the link to the YouTube channel in this group, as well as other resources. We're going to announce classes, we'll have access to other materials, and you can pose questions and make comments that I could incorporate in future classes. So I have found Facebook groups to be useful for that, and that's why I set up this one. Feel free to use it. Okay. Now, what triggered this entire class was my interest in what the world calls spirituality. And I've been asking myself questions about Jewish spirituality for a long time. Here are my top 10. Maybe you have similar top 10, maybe you have different ones. Feel free to let me know. But this is what got me started on this path. Question number 1, why is there so much repetition in Jewish prayers? The Amidah said all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time, 22 times a week. Why? 2, what exactly is kavanah? We have to daven with kavanah. How do you get it? How do you develop it? Is it a skill? What is that? Number 3, how do you avoid exploring after your heart and after your eyes, like we say in the Shema? Easier said than done. What does that mean and how do you do it? Okay, 4, why do so many Jews have no idea how to relate to God? The number is astonishing. Why is that? How did that happen? 5, why do so many Jews seem to be going through the motions mindlessly in their religious observance, especially in prayer? How many times have you seen somebody mouthing words, mouthing words, mouthing words, and with their eyes, and they're having a conversation with you otherwise, but they're mouthing prayers? How did we get such a disconnect between the body and the mind then? It's so common. Number 6, what good is speed davening? There's this competition in Minyanim, especially these days. How fast can you get through it? Frankly, I fail to see how we get any credit for any of that. Some people have said, well, you get credit for the mitzvah. How do you get credit for a meaningless mitzvah? It's beyond me. I consider it meaningless. And how do we end up in that boat? Number 7, why are so many Jews involved in spiritual or Eastern disciplines? Rabbi Kaplan makes that point. In his point, he says, well, Jews have this spiritual yearning, and for reasons which he'll explain, we have not accommodated that, so we go elsewhere. You get people like me training at a Taoist-centered martial arts academy, which by the way is very compatible with Yiddishkeit, but where's the Torah Academy? And I'm not talking about Torah Dojo. I'm talking about traditional martial arts and traditional meditation and traditional internal development. Why do I have to go to Bergenfield for that, you know, to another school? So, and you have Jews all over. How is it that so many Israelis make their pilgrimage to India as opposed to Jerusalem? Okay. Number 8, how did the prophets get their powers? I mean, were they born that way? How did they get to a point where their spiritual receptivity is so attuned they could actually get a nevuah? How did they get that way? And why aren't there more prophets today? What happened to the training and nurturance of prophets that we don't have anymore? And 10, can the miracles of the Bible really be understood with a conventional mindset? Meaning, if you take, you know, we started Breshit, you know, we finished V'zot HaBracha, we have the creation of the world, we start with the creation of the world, and we end with the death of who we claim is the greatest prophet of all time. These are not book stories. So how do we get meaning out of that? How do we appreciate how wonderful that is with the same mindset we use to use a history book or anything else? There must be something that we have to do to appreciate the astounding events that are described in Tanakh. And it has nothing to do with science. The fact that science might prove something is a nice icing on the cake, but there's got to be something we need to do to go wow with everything we're being told through the Bible. So what is it we have to do to get to that point? Those are my questions. Okay. Let me just take 1 second and see if I need to let anybody else in. So bear with me as I try to figure this out, and then we'll get started. So hold on a quick second. Okay. We got this. Okay. Good. Got 15. Okay. One last point. Okay. Good. Okay. Okay. All right, I need to apologize for folks that I made wait. Give me a little leniency here as I'm figuring this out, but we just had 15 people join. Okay, we'll continue. Just to recap, these are the questions that triggered my interest in spirituality and meditation. And through my various studies, specifically reading the teachings of Rabbi Kaplan, I have found that the missing link to every one of these questions, ranging from why is there so much repetition in Jewish prayers, all the way through what mindset do you have to be in to really appreciate Tanakh, the missing link in every one of these questions is meditation. What is meditation? Rabbi Kaplan has a very simple definition. He says, quoting from his book, Jewish Meditation, In the most general sense, meditation consists of thinking in a controlled manner. It is deciding exactly how one wishes to direct the mind for a period of time and then doing it. Interestingly enough, we have another definition of meditation. Meditation is the foundation of all true martial arts. To still and thus control the mind is of the utmost importance. That's from my instructor in Kung Fu, Shifu Raymond Alice. Sifu, by the way, is the same as Rebbe, father teacher. Chinese, that's a version of Rebbe. In Japanese, you might have heard of sensei. They play the same role. And you can see it's the exact same definition from another source as what Rabbi Kaplan came across. I have a third definition for you. This is from Steven Siebold, who is an international mental toughness coach. He says that world-class performers know that the better they become at controlling their thoughts, the better their results will be, and it all begins with metacognition. Metacognition, he says, is being able to look at your thoughts. And how do you achieve that? You achieve that through meditation. He didn't say meditation, but that's what he meant. So here we have somebody in a completely secular pursuit, unrelated to martial arts, unrelated to any kind of religious pursuit, and he comes up with the exact same skill that Rabbi Kaplan came up with, that Sifu came up with. We're all talking about gaining control of the contents of your mind. Okay, so that of course brings up the question, how do people do that? And we're going to be discussing that a lot. I think that the first thing that many people think of when they think of meditation is somebody sitting on a couch or sitting on a pillow with their legs crossed like this and their fingers like this on the knees, and they're going Om. Yeah, that is a form of meditation. And but there are many others, and Rabbi Kaplan, as we'll see later on, did this exhaustive study of all the biblical terminology that refers to some form of meditation, and there's a lot. Did Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech sit on a cushion and do that? I don't know. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but what we do know is that both were shepherds, and both were in environments that were conducive to people going internal and gaining control of their mind. One of the points we'll see Rabbi Kaplan raise is he talks a lot about Hidbodedut. Hidbodedut is something Rabbi Nachman talks a lot about, by yourselfness. And Rabbi Kaplan will point out that there's two ways of being by yourself. One is physically, you are in an environment where you're by yourself, you're in nature, you're in the woods. Rabbi Nachman talks all the time about being in nature and davening in nature. But the corollary to that is internal being by yourself, where you're alone with your thoughts and saying, I want this one, I don't want that one. Perhaps that's what Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech were doing as they were tending their flocks. There's a lot of time on their hands, there's a lot of space on their hands. And it seems to me that was a good opportunity for them to develop those skills. Okay. So that being the case, if it's completely plausible that the giants among us, that the people who are the best leaders, the best prophets, were meditators, then why aren't we doing it now? What happened? What happened? So I'll review some of what Rabbi Kaplan thinks happened. This is from Jewish Meditation, and I'll tell you exactly what he says. I'm right now on 3A. Okay. Okay. So interesting. Okay. He says as follows. He says that there is ample evidence that meditative practices were widespread among Jews throughout Jewish history. References to meditation are found in major Jewish texts in every period from the biblical to the pre-modern era. One reason this has not been universally recognized is that the vocabulary of meditation has been lost to a large degree, especially during the last century. So he's claiming that all the way up through the late 1800s, if you were to go to a shul or yeshiva or any congregation of Jews, people would be talking meditation. And they were learning Torah, if they were learning Gemara, they'd be talking meditation. If they were talking mysticism, they'd be learning meditation. But not after that, okay? Until the rise of the Jewish Enlightenment, mysticism and intellectualism had equal status within Judaism. But the goal in the Enlightenment, however, was to raise the intellectual level of Judaism. And this may have been positive, but when we became more intellectual, we downplayed the mystical end of daily life, and that included reducing the importance of meditation. Okay. He points out that there was material available that talked extensively about meditation, but it was never translated from the Hebrew. And as Hebrew became less common in common day talk and less common in schools, then the vocabulary of meditation was lost. He points out that a lot of the material that talked about meditation was hard to understand. It was esoteric. It had sophisticated concepts that your average Jew didn't have the education to comprehend. He mentioned that a lot of the references to meditation and mysticism and metaphysics were in ancient unpublished manuscripts. They were available only in libraries and museums. In a lot of cases, they were not available even to the Western world. He had to go actually to libraries in places like Moscow and get special permission to look at their archives of Jewish manuscripts to find source material for meditation. He found information that had been started and never updated. There was early attempts to publicize the teachings about meditation that were never completed. So we had to kind of complete those. And in addition, Kabbalah formed, as we will see, but it was never meant for the masses. He has this very interesting understanding of what happened to Kabbalah. And there was a very significant decision made by Chazal at the time in the 17th and 18th centuries, which basically said, unfortunately, the educational system of the rank and file Jew has created a population that really can't appreciate and understand the metaphysical concepts that our forebears once took for granted. So we're not going to release Kabbalah. We're not going to release Zohar. We're not going to have metaphysical teachings, and we're not going to have metaphysical practices, because we run the risk of people getting fed up. We run the risk of people misunderstanding them and misapplying them. And most importantly, we run the risk of the following. We run the risk of kind of whetting people's appetite for something spiritual, but then not being able to help them put into practice. And what are they going to do? They're going to go elsewhere where it's so-called easier to put it into practice. So according to Rabbi Kaplan, Chazal at that time made an editorial decision that says, it is better to not release the original product than to release Xerox copies, which people are basically not going to understand or misuse. And in a nutshell, that kind of accounts for why we're in the position today where people go to yoga retreats for meditation, but they don't go to shul or school for it. Okay. He does basically say, however, that there were two events and without patting himself on the back, he gives himself credit for one, to renew the Jewish public's interest in meditation. One was him. If you've tracked his growth as a Talmid Chacham, as a Gadol Hador, as a leader of his generation, which I think he is, if you track his career, you see that the culmination of his career were these works like this, where you have Jewish meditation, where you have meditation on the Bible. He has treatises on the Kabbalah. This is how this was the final glory of his career. And he dedicated himself to making these metaphysical concepts and ideas available. He started meditation groups. He started with one class, and he saw there was such a demand, there was such a yearning for people to kindle their spiritual sparks, that groups became very popular in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s. And even the Lubavitcher Rebbe caught wind of this, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent out a directive that Jews should start forming meditation study groups. And I know that Rabbi Kaplan had a strong relationship with the Rebbe, and that he had a strong relationship with many branches of Hasidim. And I'm quite sure that he was highly influential in getting the Lubavitchers to promote that. What they do now, I couldn't tell you, but it rose to such importance that the Rebbe actually said, we've got to do this. So you could see that that gives it a lot of substance, that Rabbi Kaplan had such merit, and that meditation posed such value that the Rebbe actually said, let's do this. Okay. So in Rabbi Kaplan's teachings, he goes to the point and says, there were really sound reasons why we kind of dropped the ball, why they're not available on an everyday basis at this point. And then he kind of backtracks, and he talks about how the pivotal point which replaced intellectual pursuits, which replaced spiritual pursuits with intellectual pursuits, was the Jewish Enlightenment. And there's a little bit of text here that talks about it for your reference. It ended towards the 1880s. And this is at the point where it became more important for Jews to be smart and have book learning than to be spiritual. Okay. Now, how do we know, and how does he look at meditation and nevuah? Okay. This is what he says. Now, I need to qualify something. When I'm giving credit where credit is due, Rabbi Kaplan has an enormous prestige with regards to his Torah knowledge. So he takes the liberty of making statements as fact without citing sources. And I give him credit for that, and I accept that. There are other times when he'll give the address for what he's saying, somewhere in Tanakh or somewhere in Medrash or somewhere. But I hold both to be true. So when he makes statements of fact as to what happened historically, the decisions of our sages, I will run with that. Okay, so for example, he says something like this. He says, it appears from both biblical and post-biblical sources that meditation was central to the prophetic experience, and that this experience was attained in the meditative state. The Bible states explicitly that the prophets used chants and music to attain higher states of consciousness. Careful philological analysis of certain key words in the Bible suggests that they refer to specific meditative methods. And then he mentions that he discusses that in meditation in the Bible. We are going to be going through this, and you'll be astounded, the research. You'll be astounded about how many biblical phrases and terms refer to meditation in various forms. And as he makes the point, when we read them and we're not aware that they refer to meditation, unfortunately, too often we don't get what the point of the text is. And it's only if you understand that the terms are referring to a meditative state, can you say, aha, that's so interesting. That's what makes sense. That's why Yitzchak was in the field. That's why Yechezel's saying this stuff. Those verbs have meaning, but you can't really get it unless you have somewhat of a grasp of what meditation is. He says this flat out. He goes, furthermore, he says, from the literature, it seems evident that a prophet would almost always experience his first prophetic experience while in a meditative state. One example that comes to my mind is Avraham Avinu, with the parting of the calves and so on. If you look at the terminology, he's into some kind of deep sleep. What is that? Or even Adam Arishon, if you talk about whatever surgery or whatever creation God did with him, you have to be somewhat sedated in order for that to take place. And one would think that considering there was no anesthesiologist available at the time, that there would have to be some kind of meditative state involved for God to do that. Okay, that's my take on it. Okay. However, after his first meditative experience, the prophet could experience nevuah without meditation. Now, this is a really key point when it comes to meditation. Why? It's because meditation becomes your frame of reference. And I'll give you a martial arts comparison to this. When my Sifu says meditation is the foundation of all true martial arts, which actually is a saying by the masters of other internal martial arts, what they're basically saying is, you've got to meditate, and you've got to meditate, and you've got to meditate. Why? Because when you're in a combat situation, you've got to be cool-headed. You've got to have your thoughts with you because you don't want to turn into an animal. Okay, so the purpose of the meditation that you do is your reference point, so that when you're engaged with somebody, you automatically fall into a meditative state of mind without having to go to the guy, could you please hold on? I want to sit down on my cushion. I'm going to meditate a little bit, and then I'm going to be nice, cool, calm, and collected, and we don't have to beat each other up. You've got to have a default position programmed so that automatically you're like, okay, I can handle this. I'll do only what I need to do to stop this, and then we're going to move on. So when Rabbi Kaplan says that a prophet might meditate once and get a nevuah, but then he won't have to meditate again, that says to me that that became his frame of reference. Would it be true that some of them would get the frame of reference after one session meditation? I guess. Many of them had to go through a number of sessions to make that their frame of reference. But that after that, they didn't have to specifically meditate to get the nevuah. They went ahead and they just used that as their default position, and they were tuned in and they got a prophecy. Okay. So he says, in addition, sometimes prophecy would come to a prophet unexpectedly and without warning. This probably involved a phenomenon sometimes referred to as flashback. After a person has become adept at reaching higher levels of consciousness after meditation, he can occasionally reach such levels spontaneously as well. This seems to be evident in the experiences of a number of prophets. That is for sure. If anybody has done any kind of lengthy meditation, any meditation for a certain period of time, all of a sudden you're like, whew, you fall into it. That is definitely true, and it's definitely good. Okay. Furthermore, he says, and let's see where we are. I'm in C3 right now. Furthermore, he says that during the period when the Bible was written until approximately 400 Common Era, so we're talking about a couple of thousand years, meditation was practiced by a large proportion of the Israelite people. The Talmud and Medrash state explicitly that over 1 million people were involved in such disciplines. Again, he doesn't cite a source, but whoa, okay. Regular schools of meditation existed, led by master prophets. The master prophets, in turn, were under the leadership of the primary prophets, the ones actually quoted in the Bible. So you have Yechezkel would have a bunch of Talmidim, who in turn would have a bunch of Talmidim. In these schools, people were taught meditative methods in order to attain a closeness to God. As a side effect of such meditation, prophecy was also sometimes achieved. All right, so going back to one of our original questions, why don't most people feel close to God? They're not doing something which brings them close to God. But in those days, 2,500 years ago, they went to school and they did stuff with the specific purpose of getting close to God. And that stuff was some form of meditation. And as a side product, as a side benefit, some of them attained nevuah. But the purpose was to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Isn't that something? Okay, so it shows that getting close to God can be a specific task you do. I'm going to do this now to get close to God. It's not just going to happen by magic. It's not going to hit me in the middle of the night. I'm going to do this. And that's what we do, and it works. And it worked for these guys. Okay. He goes on to say that since non-prophets may have been practicing meditators, they would also experience spontaneous prophecy or visions without actually meditating. This would explain the biblical accounts of individuals who had prophetic visions, even though they were not meditating and had no prior prophetic experience. When a person engages in meditation on a regular basis, he can reach meditative states of consciousness spontaneously without meditation, and these states can cause him to experience visions. So imagine this society. You have mainstream schools, the Rosh Yeshiva of which is a biblical prophet, the faculty of which are trained prophets, training people, your average population, training them in meditation. Your rank and file student is becoming closer to God and having spontaneous prophecy, even though they're not training themselves to be a prophet. I mean, that's what life was like for these people. That was the spiritual life they had. And it wasn't an esoteric thing that you go to esoteric academies. This was the mainstream life of the Jew at this time. Okay. Now, I'm on C5 here. Meditation, okay. Everything found in later literature seems to indicate that these meditative schools required a strong discipline and faithful adherence to a strict regimen. You better believe it. Meditation is really hard. You got to do it, and you got to do it, and you got to do it some more. I'm going to give you a taste of it in a few minutes. You got to keep at it. Okay. The schools were extremely demanding and were open only to those willing to devote themselves totally. Okay. So this is not a situation where the parent says the kid to school and say, I'm paying a big tuition, you'd better show up. Even though there was 1 million people, according to the Talmud, these were people who elected to go there. Okay. Before even being admitted to one of these ancient meditative schools, a person had to be not only spiritually advanced, but in complete control of his emotions and feelings. Beyond that, the disciplines of the Torah and commandments were central to these schools, and these disciplines required a degree of self-mastery to which not everyone could aspire. Okay. So now he's talking about a dynamic in which these schools are available to everybody. However, you've got to have your act together in terms of your midot, in terms of your personality, in terms of you're dedicated to Torah, in terms of your values, in terms of your, to some extent, your self-mastery in order to be admitted. So they were, on the one hand, open to the mainstream, but by the same token, you still had to qualify, which is exactly the right thing to do. So so what's remarkable though, what's remarkable is that as he quotes the text, you still had 1 million or whatever students at the time enrolled in these schools. And, you know, the population of the Jews at that time couldn't have been close to what we have now, even post Shoah. So I'm saying is a significant part of the Jewish population at this time were spiritually and personally developed, developed to an advanced point where they can enroll in these schools. Okay. 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 However, there was competition. And this became the start of the downfall, which we'll talk a little bit about. At the same time as Jews were trying to raise their children to qualify for entrance into these schools, there was other options. They were in a non-Jewish world. Just there were Jews certainly in Haaretz, in Israel, and there were Jews outside of Haaretz. And the problem became that even in the land of Israel, there were pagan cultures. There were people that worshiped idols. There were people who had a phony version, but very attractive version of spirituality. So what would happen? You'd have Jewish meditative schools requiring extensive discipline and preparation, but you had other idolatrous schools saying, no, come. It's like, you know, we got an open door, and frankly, you don't have to be as good to get into our school. These guys are demanding all this time on the cushion, whatever else. You know, we'll give you 20 minutes on the cushion, and then it's playtime. So that was an attraction. And number 6, idolatry seemed easier. Okay. And the problem became that a person could at least think he was having a transcendental experience without adhering to the tight discipline of Torah and Judaism. So there became the possibility that a lot of Jews would say, I don't want to work so hard to go to the Jewish school of meditation and get close to God. These guys are giving me an easier route. Why wouldn't I take it? Okay. And as Rabbi Kaplan says, and he says it, number 7 here, in very blunt terms, he says, for anyone who has ever had a taste of the transcendental, it can be an infinitely sweet experience, more pleasurable than love or sex. For many people, it was an experience after which they would actually lust. When the Talmud speaks of the, quote, lust for idolatry, it could be speaking of the magnetic attraction that this spiritual experience had for people. If they could not get it from Israelite sources, they would seek it in idolatrous rites. So you have this unfortunate dynamic of people in Jewish communities getting a taste of the spiritual, understanding the concept, close to God and this and that, but not everybody, not every family had what it takes to climb the ladder. And so they had this taste for it, go elsewhere to satisfy the taste. Okay. And Rabbi Kaplan points out in number 8 here, as long as the Israelites were in their homeland, the situation was more or less controlled. Idolatry may have a strong temptation, but the prophetic mystical schools were strong enough to unite the people and prevent them from assimilating. Okay. And even if people or individuals or groups backslid, they could always be drawn back into the fold. Okay. So you still have this tension, but you're in a Jewish environment, people slip, at least you can pull them back. Okay. But as we see in number 9, all this changed with the diaspora, which scattered Jews all over the world. It was realized that if the masses remained involved in prophetic mysticism, the temptations drawing them to idolatry would ultimately alienate them from the Torah. Isolated, widely scattered groups would be ready prey to false teachers and experiences. Therefore, around this time, the more advanced forms of meditation were hidden from the masses and made part of a secret teaching. Now only the most qualified individuals would be party to the secrets of advanced prophetic meditation. So again, I don't know who Chazal was. I don't know who the sages were in control at this time. Anshe Knesset Hagdalah, I guess. And you have a situation where they're basically saying, as I mentioned earlier, we got two choices here. We could keep promoting true spirituality, true closeness to God on a not easy path, and run the risk that there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to take it and run and settle for something less and get off the derech, or we can just bottle it up, put it in the side, have only an elite few learn it, but at least they'll be learning the right thing. And that's exactly what they did. They went behind curtain number 2 and they said, we cannot any longer teach this stuff. It's too dangerous. We run the risk of losing people. Okay. Lastly, number 10, C10. One of the last of the great prophets was Ezekiel, who lived in Babylonia right at the beginning of the exile. The first chapter of the book of Ezekiel is one of the most mysterious parts of the entire Bible. In it, the prophet describes his visions of angels and the divine throne in extraordinary detail. According to one tradition, this vision contained the keys to prophetic meditation and, if understood, could serve as a guide to attaining prophecy. The study of this chapter became known as the discipline of the Chariot, Maseh Merkavah. The methodology was there, but without the key, it could not be understood. He's mentioning this because in Rabbi Kaplan's eyes, this Chariot text, which we're going to discuss a little bit later on, once Chazal decided we can't teach this anymore, that was the sign that Jewish mystical teaching and meditative practice was put on the back burner. This teaching by Yechezkel, this whole prophecy of his, seems to be like the hallmark of Jewish prophetic teaching. It's like as high as you can get in terms of symbolism. And once they put that under wraps, it kind of sealed the fate for a long time of Jewish meditation, mystical teaching, and spiritual teaching being put on the back burner. Okay, so we're going to pick up next week with D. What we're going to do now, as I mentioned earlier, is finish with a few minutes of meditation. Then I'm going to unmute everybody, and those who want to stay can make comments, ask questions as we go. We're going to meditate for a few minutes, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to do this. There's 3 components. We're going to remain sitting, not lying down, but sitting and sitting straight. And the reason why we're sitting straight is to have a straight spine. The reason why you have a straight spine is 2. One is this way your body won't become a burden, because if you're leaning over, if you have bad posture, all of a sudden you're going to be thinking, oh, my back hurts, my neck hurts, and so on. You're going to lose your concentration. And number 2, with a straight spine, the energy goes up your spine, and it just makes life easier for you. There's better circulation, you're more comfortable. Then what you're going to do is you're going to choose a focal point. Focal point could be anything. It could be a sound. A lot of people choose focusing on the breath coming in the nostrils, right at the tip of the nostril. Focus on the breath coming in, going out, going in, going out. And the whole exercise is to focus on the breath. Now, the meditative part of it is returning to the focal point. Why? Because you're going to lose your concentration. As soon as I say, focus on your focal point, you're going to do this for a millisecond, and they're going to be thinking, oh, gee, whatever. Now you got to go back to the focal point. That's the meditation. That's developing the skill of meditating. So just keep going back. What you don't do is say, oh, I just lost it, forget about it. No, you keep going back, you keep going back. And if we were doing this for an hour, you'd be going back 10,000 times and developing the skill to stay focused. Okay. So that's the meditation. So let's now close our eyes.